Hey everybody, it's Nate Charles. It's October 13th, 2025, and I'm back with another installment of the Rule of Law Brief. I apologize, I haven't posted very much in the last few days. I got married over the weekend. I am the luckiest guy in the world. I married the love of my life and my best friend. My now wife has been a part of my life in some way, shape, or form for 25 years. She was a classmate of mine at the U.S. Naval Academy. After she graduated, she became a Marine Corps helicopter pilot. She did 3 tours in Iraq, primarily as a medevac pilot. She then went on to be one of the Marine One helicopter pilots for President Obama. My wife is a badass. I am lucky beyond words. I love her beyond words, and I am so excited to live the rest of my life with her. If there is anything that I am incapable of doing to help lead the United States out of the situation we find ourselves in with President Trump, I guarantee she is capable of doing it. I feel blessed that I'm going to have her beside me for the rest of my life, both personal and professional. But now, let's talk about what we came here to talk about. I think we need to understand that there are some deep and concerning parallels between what is currently going on with ICE in the United States and the Brownshirts of Nazi Germany. When a government starts rapidly recruiting officers for a domestic enforcement force, arming them, militarizing them, glorifying them, history should make us uneasy because we've seen this before. Not in some vague rhetorical sense, but in a historical one. In the 1930s, Adolf Hitler's Nazi party built a movement around a paramilitary organization called the SA, or the Brownshirts. They called themselves patriots. They stood for law and order. Their mission? To protect Germany from internal enemies, communists, Jews, dissidents, and immigrants. But that phrase, internal enemies, meant something very specific, just as ICE's internal enemies mean something very specific today. The SA targeted communists because they stood at the opposite end of the political spectrum. They were the leftists, the organizers, the people who threatened fascism with competing ideas. The SA targeted Jews because they portrayed them as foreigners, as immigrants who were supposedly taking jobs from pure Germans, manipulating the economy and corrupting the nation from within. The Nazis built their power by convincing ordinary Germans that their enemies were the outsiders, that the immigrant, the dissident, and the leftists were to blame for all of their hardships. That language should sound disturbingly familiar, because the modern Republican Party, and particularly Donald Trump, use the exact same rhetorical devices. They scapegoat immigrants, vilify dissidents, and paint an entire political opposition as enemies of the state. And just as the SA served as the street-level enforcers of Nazi ideology, today's ICE, particularly the Enforcement and Removal Operations Directorate, or ERO, is being twisted into the enforcement arm of MAGA, the muscle of a political movement that has abandoned law for loyalty. Now let's be clear about something. ICE ERO has been a legitimate federal law enforcement agency since shortly after 9/11. Its formation was part of a necessary restructuring of the Department of Homeland Security. The legacy officers of ICE ERO carried out difficult duties, enforcing lawful removal orders, locating fugitives, and maintaining border integrity. And they did it with professionalism and restraint, with some notable exceptions. I've written about them on my website. These early agents understood that enforcing immigration law was a constitutional responsibility, not a political crusade. For the most part, they were professionals in the truest sense. But that's not the ICE ERO that we see now. The modern iteration has abandoned the standards that once defined it. Loyalty over law and ideology over integrity. It's being deliberately stacked with low-performing, low-intelligence, authoritarian thugs. Not to make it more effective, but to make it more compliant. When you take a professional federal agency and turn it into a political weapon, you're not enforcing immigration law anymore. You're building a strongman's army. Both the Nazi SA, the Brownshirts, and ICE's Modern Enforcement and Removal Operations Directorate are plussing up their ranks by appealing to toxic masculinity. That's a common thread. Both movements expand their power by recruiting men through the promise of restored manhood, by equating strength with aggression, discipline with domination, and service with submission to authority. As Paige Sheffield notes in her study of Nazi gender ideology, fascism itself was a masculine ideology, one that promised to restore men to their rightful place after the humiliation, defeat, and social change that occurred after World War I. Nazis promised a return to traditional manhood, and they sold that promise through organizations like the SA. They told disaffected young men that their violence was virtue, that obedience was honor, and that loyalty was strength. They created what Hitler called the new fascist man, aggressive, hardened, and devoted to preserving a perverted ideal of what Germany was and stood for, not disciplined in the service of justice, but disciplined in the service of domination. It was masculinity untethered from conscience, a cult of strength masquerading as patriotism. A cult of strength masquerading as patriotism. And that same cult of strength is being resurrected today. Just as the Nazis recruited the Brownshirts by appealing to wounded pride and the fantasy of restoring manhood, the modern ICE particularly its enforcement and removal operations arm, is being expanded through the same toxic formula. A recruitment culture that glorifies aggression, toughness, and domination, and tells men that brute enforcement is proof of virtue and loyalty. Both movements feed on insecurity. Both sell violence as a virtue, and both recruit in the name of order while dismantling the very idea of justice. That's the same playbook being run today. Trump and the Republican Party talk about defending the homeland, about taking our country back, about invasions at the southern border. Those are not policy arguments. They're identity triggers. They take economic anxiety, social dislocation, and masculine insecurity, and they weaponize them into hate. ICE's modern recruitment materials echo those same themes: toughness, combat readiness, and the notion that real men stand the line. That's not about law enforcement. That's myth-making, the creation of a warrior identity serving ideology rather than justice. And that's exactly what the Brownshirts were. Take men who feel powerless, give them a cause, a weapon, and permission, and call it patriotism. But patriotism without principle is just power. And when power becomes its own justification, law becomes its disguise. ICE ERO once stood for professionalism, restraint, and public trust. But under political pressure and ideological corrosion, it risks becoming something darker, an instrument of fear dressed in the language of order. That isn't inevitable, but it is a warning. And history is flashing brightly right in front of us. Because every time a democracy starts recruiting for toughness instead of truth, or for loyalty instead of the law, it's already rehearsing for the next regime that doesn't believe in either truth or the law. I'm Nathan Charles, former federal prosecutor, national security official, and managing partner at Charles International Law. If you care about constitutional limits, accountability, and the lessons history keeps trying to teach us, subscribe and stay with me. Because the fight for democracy doesn't just happen abroad, it happens right here, at home, and especially right now.